Cool, thanks. So we're gonna start off today by addressing a topic that's been talked about a long time over the last year or so. It's really one about transparency, and a lot of people like me, a lot of the people kind of who supply services and technology to the sector, talk a lot about transparency. But is transparency the issue, and how far have we got in that from your point of view? I mean, Barbara, what's your point of view on this?
So, yeah, transparency is for sure one of the biggest issues that we start facing, let me say, a couple of years ago, or at least thinking about. And to me, honestly speaking, transparency is, and by the way, just for you to know, I'm the less digital person here on stage in this moment, and so I have a more generic background. And so to me, what transparency stands for is trust, basically. And trust, to me, has a double phase. There is a soft trust and a hard trust. So the hard trust is about technology, is about data, is about KPI, is about all this kind of stuff. And we are talking and talking and talking about this also during these 2 last days here. The point is about the soft trust. The soft trust, to me, is about, let me say, to use one of the expressions that I heard here during this today, is about having friends to help us to navigate towards a new world. And so friendship, to me, is exactly what is trust about. Friendship meaning having tailor-made solutions from our friends, meaning agency partners, vendors, data suppliers, the full supply chain of the digital world. It's about having a clear vision, clear objectives, and share objective with them. And it's also about putting money together, because friends, normally, they tend to invest money together in the same adventure, let me say. And so trust is also about rethinking some way, and so transparency is about rethinking probably the way we are working together as a system. And I'm not using the word ecosystem that I heard again a lot during these 2 days, because to me in this moment the communication ecosystem is not an ecosystem yet. It's a system of different players competing each other for the fair share of profit. You know, we are still missing a way of better collaborating together. And this is to me about transparency, basically.
I love what I'm hearing here, and talking about friendship. I would say that we talk a lot about transparency as how do we make our media dollars working better until now. And I think now, because of it was forced or not, I think it's good news. I'm sure you guys have heard about GDPR all day long, so I'm not going to go into that, but we've heard a lot about the raised awareness of consumers around trust and the expectations that we have here. And I think now it's about not only looking at how do we make transparency work for us advertisers, but how do we equally make that work for consumers? So to me, transparency is all about 2 ways. How do we make sure we look at the transparency across the value chain? And of course, there's a sense of efficiencies in there and the effectiveness on how we reach consumers. But now we also need to look at, to me, this is proportionally equal to how do we provide transparency to consumers. So now we have a key mission as advertisers to really look at how do we gain that transparency across the value chain. I could dare using an analogy here on, I've loved the cover of The Economist, I think, last year, that's saying data is the new oil. And I know we've heard a lot about data today. And if data is a new oil and you apply that to transportation, I would say until now, until a couple of years back, we were just sitting in the back of the car and waiting for our partners to drive us. Now it's about how do we make sure we gain transparency on how this transportation system works and where do we want to go. So I'll stop the analogy here, but I think this is really key that we go more into discussions of ownership, discussion on transparency on both sides, and this is where truly we can say that to our consumers.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think something that gave me the shivers earlier on was, I think, the CEO from the IAB talking about the relative importance of reputation, which I vehemently disagree with, because our performance promise to our shareholders and to our people and to consumers is that we want to be the best performing, most trusted and respected CPG in the world at Diageo, and trust and respect equal reputation, and reputation is absolutely essential. So when you think about the portfolio of brands that we look after, like Johnny Walker and Baileys and Guinness, these brands have been around for hundreds of years, and we're merely passing them on to the next generation. And we have a duty of care to make sure that we're looking after our brands and that we're safeguarding the reputation and the trust that consumers hold them in. Because if anything is coming up in certainly the last 2 days in terms of what I've seen, it's around trust. And that puts brands like Johnny Walker and Diageo in an exceptionally good place from a performance perspective, because a shortcut for consumers when they're not sure whether they're talking to a robot or whether the person on the other end of the phone is actually the person who's booking, or the Google PA, then I think that becomes a massive issue, and then consumers will shortcut and sort of go with trusted brands. So trust and transparency are massively important in terms of our world.
Okay, and so it sounds like, from what three of you said, that transparency is the first stepping stone towards that trust, and it's like trust. The end game is ultimate trust along the whole value chain. What's the responsibility of that value chain between you guys and the publishers to actually help you engender that trust?
I'll go first. There's a responsibility on us as brands, and we talked about this before. I think the responsibility on the brands is to understand what good performance looks like. It's incumbent upon us to make sure that we clearly articulate to any of our partners what success looks like. And if we're not doing that really clearly, I'd absolutely challenge you to challenge us to make sure that we are. Because without really clearly understanding what the impact of our advertising is in terms of consumer behavior, then we're not doing our jobs properly. So that's where we come in. That's my role in Diageo, is to make sure that we're providing that sort of level of clarity on what good looks like.
I think I agree, and what you mentioned on this value chain, this is where it starts, right? So I'm going to be a bit provocative. It's kind of unpacking a little bit the gray box here. Mm-hmm. And if we want to be able to bring trust and have trust with our consumers, at some point we need to make sure that we work as partners, and you mentioned friendship here. We work as partners in looking at where does it make sense for what we want to achieve. And then there's a sense of choices at some point here that needs to be made. And there's a sense of responsibility on the partners to showcase where is the value not only at the point of delivery and piece by piece. If I'm going back on my car analogy, I don't want only to have people coming to me and saying, this is the best wheels and this is the best accessories. I want somebody who can give me something that brings the relevancy and the value across what I'm trying to achieve. And so we need to have partners who can understand that and come to us with that value instead of just the value they provide on their own piece.
Yeah, and if I can build on what the guys just told us, and I fully support everything. Yeah, it's about really to understand what it really matters for us. What our definition of value, what you consider, or us, we consider the picture of success. Because without this very clear in mind, it's very difficult then to understand what are the KPIs, the key relevant KPIs that we have to map. And I was some months ago at the local National Advertiser Association presentation of a very interesting work that they have done on mapping the KPIs, especially in the digital environment. And they came out after the first, rough evaluation to something around 500 different KPIs. So it's a mess. And I think that part of this confusion is generated by us, because we are not so clear with the objective that we want to achieve, that we tend to, ask for whatever. And so what we have done internally is to kick off a few weeks ago exactly a work stream to better clarify what are the key objectives and the key KPIs related to these objectives to be mapped across the countries, also to start looking at the entire universe of the digital environment with a single kind of color glass. So, yeah, I totally agree. We have a lot of work to be done, us as advertisers, for sure.
Just to react on that, I think you said it. I don't know if we created the complexity or if the complexity came to us. In the end, we have a complexity here, and we tend to get lost into some of that complexity and the shiny new data players and shiny new stuff we can activate here. And I think you're right that we need to not to forget that we have brand fundamentals and why we're here for. We are to build brands, we're here to delight consumers, we're here to build trusted relationship with consumers. And again, as long as we don't lose that end of the objective, the rest is just a mean. We tend to optimize a lot, probably too much against proxy metrics, against where we deliver, right? And so what I'm saying is probably easier in a direct-to-consumer, full direct-to-consumer world. But I think as CPGs, we have to understand what would be the systematic model for us to start measuring on consumer value and not only on efficiencies measures or financial measures, and really looking around the consumer value we have in here.
Okay, yes, you've raised a number of interesting points there. So we're already on the brand KPIs section, and it's kind of one of the things we notice a lot is, as myself as a provider of ad formats and sort of a number of other people in the room do the same thing, is that we tend to get all compared together on an apples for apples basis. So the two metrics that seem to stand out for everybody is click-through rate and viewability. And we're doing branding, so click-through rate really doesn't actually mean that much, but it's viewability maybe, you can actually prove that a human being has actually seen the ad. And you're talking about sort of us being able to share values with you sort of along the chain and be able to work with you on how can we measure and what can we measure. And from the perspective from a lot of the market is that to actually get a proper brand metric in place, you need to do a lot of post-exposure surveys, which are expensive and timely and manual. But there must be a more efficient way and a better way of actually being able to respond to what your needs are in that area.
And, sorry, go. This is a very relevant point. So measurement, by the way, I think that is one of the key critical areas. We are still too weak up to now, at least again internally us as advertisers, because we are so used to just look at this kind of metrics. So a viewable impression, yeah, of course, is better than a non-viewable impression, or something coming from a boat or something like this, for sure. But what about the impact on my business of this viewable impression? Is my target reacting properly as I want with this impression or not? And so again, going back to this morning presentations where we saw that the brand law is now based also on something more emotional and related to experiences, to value, to respect of the consumers, while we are too stick to the traditional kind of metrics. So I think that in this moment, measurement and looking at tools that are able to measure holistically, and not only the rational part, but also the emotional part, the implication on the brand sales, are a critical part where, once more, we need our friends' support in a proactive way. Because at the very end of the story, in the majority of the cases, also our friends are coming back to us with, no, but this is the click-through rate that we reached, look at these CPM results, and so on and so forth. But we need probably much more, especially in the digital environment, that probably is one of the most, not one, the most interactive and emotion generation kind of connection point. So it's a very relevant point. It's one of measurement for sure.
Right. No. So I mean, you mentioned there must be a way. I'm sure if we had the way, we would just sell it to everyone. There's probably a way. I think you said holistic, and I think that's key here. Is that we know that at some point, if we want to measure the full brand value we want to bring here, we're going to hit some walls. I'm not going to mention those, but we're going to hit some walls. We're going to hit about how do we measure the efficiencies at the point of delivery, and then how do we measure that holistically in terms of the value we can bring. I don't think there's one solution for all of that, but it's definitely where we push everyone and the middleman and everyone to actually try and help us to show where could that value lie at every piece of the puzzle here. So but we will have to work, and I'm not going to say control, but get more transparency in terms of how do we actually look at putting all the pieces of the puzzle together so that we can measure to our own objectives.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, we've got sort of 3 levels at which we look at ROI. So long term, which is outside of the year, short term, inside the year, and then operational, which is, within campaign. The job that we do is to try and map the short term sort of lead metrics with our slower lag metrics that come from the sort of econometric measurement. And also the job that we have as well is to close the loop between demand generation and purchase. So a lot of the technologies which I'll be interested in are the ones that are allowing us to have transparency of data between, driving behavioral shifts with consumers and through to purchase with our partners, with our retail partners, and with our route to consumer. So anything which allows me to do that with greater level of surety, I will be making those decisions anyway. So as long as we have partners that want to be part of providing solutions for those decisions, then I think we'll all be working in the same direction. It's never going to be perfect, but they're the decisions that we're going to be making about how we invest our money. So it's sort of incumbent upon the whole supply chain to make sure that we have a degree of sort of shift and transparency. We go back to transparency, but that's what we need in terms of the metrics. If you can challenge us on what those metrics should be, again, it's sort of like we should be very open to those kinds of discussions.
And if I can just build on this last point, we talk about holistically measure what our effort to communicate with the consumers, but to me, holistic means not only cross-media measurement, but also cross-brands measurement, because going back to the concept of demand generation, that is what sometimes we are not so attentive to, because we are still thinking by brand in silos. Here there is also a matter of how to manage the entire portfolio throughout the value chain. And also this area, I think that it's quite weak, and we have for sure to start working more deeply to better understand how to do it.
Okay, so how do you actually go about that, all of that? And so where, on the one side, you say, right, you don't know everything that exists. You're not necessarily sure of how you want to measure everything, and you're not necessarily sure on what is measurable. And then you have the market that is coming with all sorts of different things. There's cost per hour and cost per second and viewability and all sorts of different ways to measure. And then in between, you've probably got the agencies which are kind of distilling everything in to sort of be able to sort the wheat from the chaff for you. But Bastien, you talked earlier on about ownership. I mean, at what point does it become your internal responsibility as an advertiser to actually take on board everything from the market and understand what's important for you? And at what point do you actually have to delegate a certain level of responsibility for maybe a filter or distillation of what is actually out there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's a huge topic, right? So I'm sure this is the case for all the advertisers around here. I mean, you need to know where to start, and we need to make some choices here, but I think the question of ownership is really key, and the ownership can be not necessarily in the full value chain and talking about all the operations. We're not talking to go from A to Z in 2 days, but actually starting from where the data lies. Because all of that holistic measurements and performance and all of what we're talking about related to transparency is how can we have the data passing from one hand to another in a transparent way that we can keep the relationship with our consumers. So this is at the technology level that it happens. So there is a piece of how do we gain ownership, and ownership doesn't mean that we control and we operate everything, but at least that we can have access to that data, we can extract that for measurement from ourselves, and we can extract that from insights as well. And there is a sense of taking back ownership of that tech for advertisers, and then the decision for advertisers, how far to go here is up to the environment and the current landscape. But I think that's key that we start here. And of course, then comes the question about how do we operate that? And comes the question, how do you start connecting these together? But at least that's where we're starting.
And what about Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I want to own the technology and the data, so I can make decisions and choices. So I think, you know, at the moment that it's not necessarily a choice that brands are making in terms of how they operate. So I think you have to be in a position where you can, you know, you can make a evaluative decision on what you do and what you don't do, and what you then ask your partners to do on your behalf. But it has to come from a position of knowledge rather than sort of a default. So I think, you know, a lot of what we're doing is trying to unlock the value of our own data assets, as well as work through how we can join up all of the, you know, all of the assets, all of the data that we're driving from our campaign level data and our sort of our consumer level data. So I think that's the piece for me. So if I know that I have transparency in the technology and the data, then it becomes a much simpler thing for us to articulate what we need from our partners.
Okay, and Barbara, you proclaimed yourself earlier on as the least digital, the least technical of us on stage today. But how much support do you rely on from external partners for being able to operate digitally, whether that's in terms of media planning or using sort of different data lakes or data management tools or different DSPs and SSP relationships? And how much of that can you actually do internally and hire to resource yourself?
So, to be very honest, we are not equipped internally. And it's not a matter of technology, because you can buy technology. It's a matter of capabilities. So in this moment, I think that us as a marketeers, and we are a pure marketing company, we are not, you know, up to speed with the rest of the market. This means that on one side, we are trying to build some capabilities inside, so on the talking about DMP or DSP, but also data scientists, so people that then they are able to use the tool. But we are highly relying on our external partners. And we are working not only at the local level, but also at the global level to find a way to create a structure that should be beneficial not only for one country, but for more than one country, especially for some target. This is very relevant because we know that some target, they have the same, you know, profiles basically all across the world. And so having a central data repository also for us should be very beneficial in terms of then activating the marketing levers. So in this moment, we are basically buying everything outside, but the intention, the design is of, let's say, digitalizing the company, starting from data ownership for sure, and then all the rest of the capabilities. It will take time, of course, and we will continue to rely a lot on our friends once more. And
so I was just going to react to my colleague here on when you say knowledge. I love the fact that you say it needs to be informed by the knowledge you have, right? So of course, I mean, we can start with data and therefore technology, but it needs to be informed by your strategic intent. That's one thing we're trying to get internally as well, which is we're not looking at something that is data-driven, we're looking at something that is data-powered. And I think it's a bit of a words missing here, but it's just to get the intent that we're not expecting from technology to do all of the work for us. This is to inform knowledge for marketeers and for brand builders and business people to actually make better decisions. And I think that's the key when you say knowledge. I wanted to react on that, because I think that's the key, that we have high expectations, or we tend to see high expectations on technology, a magical overnight switch that is going to do all the work for us. Actually, it's just that it's going to change skill set, it's going to change the way we operate, and it needs to inform our knowledge rather than expecting from doing the work on our behalf. I just wanted to react on that.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to lead on that. I'll just say, so is the toughest challenge actually getting the skill sets into your companies to run that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I find most exciting about artificial intelligence and machine learning is the potential to sort of leapfrog the capability gaps that we have and that Barbara talked about. I think, you know, we're challenged in terms of resource within, you know, within our marketing teams. You know, they increasingly have a very complex a job that incorporates lots of different things that they probably weren't and aren't experienced of. So anything which can allow our marketing teams to make better, smarter decisions in a much quicker way so that we can deploy and redeploy as quickly as possible is got to be really important. So that's why we're really looking at the capability around sort of AI and sort of prescriptive analytics rather than predictive. So, you know, really we want the machine to be telling or giving multiple choice questions to the marketeers so that they can look, quickly assimilate the information and make some very quick decisions.
I think this is where there can be an improvement or a great opportunity for all of our partners to actually use those technologies to ramp up the capabilities they can help for us to operate as well. So if you were doing that task and that task, like, I mean, on creative or on media operations as well, and I've seen the presentation from Xaxis before, this is where there is a huge opportunity for everyone in the room here to actually gain from that change and keep operating with us. And you're saying friendship again, I like that, because there's still room for a lot of players here.
Okay, so there's some upcoming legislation that you may or may not have heard of. Do you think some of that is going to help fluidify some of those relationships? Is it going to help people be more open in cooperating with you and developing those different aspects?
You know, I think that it helped a lot to raise the point very heavily. So I don't know exactly where we will land, because I don't think that the majority of the companies, they are ready to embrace the new legislation. But at least this helped, again, us a lot to raise the bar of the attention, also internally with the senior management, especially to the again, the need of digitalize some way the way we operate and the way we are running the relationship with the consumers. So
beyond being ready technically or legally, do you think it would lead to a change in mindset of the players in the market? Is that going to make discussions more easier for you?
Yeah, I think, you know, consumers and businesses are hypersensitive to it. So I think, you know, and really sort of reflects on what we were talking about earlier around trust. So, you know, anything which causes consumers to question sort of the trusted nature of brands, I think is actually plays into, you know, the heritage of you know, our brands. So I think that's, it's not something that we're shying away from at all. In fact, you know, it's something that, you know, we're very, very comfortable with, you know, and it has to become just part of how we do business.
I mean, I think it's great news. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's changing. It could be painful in certain areas, but I think it's great news for the consumers. The fact that it has accelerated in the past months for all the changes we know has brought some changes on the ecosystem or the landscape here to help us moving faster. But I think it's great news because, again, back to the first point on trust and transparency, if we can't get the transparency of our value chain, how can we tell our consumers and our users that actually we're being transparent to them? So I think it's great news, it's changing, but I think that's the right move.
Okay, fine. And finally, and this is a topic that we didn't talk about in our prep call, but there's been a lot of talk about blockchain and distributed ledgers and their applicability in this kind of area, sort of being able to guarantee quality and to guarantee, well, actually help towards trust. I mean, is that something that's on your radar at this stage?
Yeah, it starts to be, and we've been doing a couple of tests and pilots on how to use, I'm sure like everyone, on how to use blockchain to actually start to look at the value chain and transparency here. So you can use that for transparency matters, you can, on privacy matters, you can use that for looking at where your dollars are going as well. So we've done a couple of pilots in that. So it starts to be on the radar more and more. Of course, it goes back also to the supply chain and transparency in food and drinks and beverages and all of that. But in the media space, I think this is very useful as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we're looking at and testing at the moment. We've got a couple of tests running, both externally and internally, in terms of the impact of blockchain. It's really early, so I don't really see it having any substantive sort of impact in the next 18 to 24 months, really. But it's incumbent upon us all to sort of look at what the impact could be and how it can change our operations. I think it really is. It's just a technology which is enabling a lot of the conversation which we've just been having around transparency and the sharing of data. So because a lot of the data requires hardware as well, certainly in the supply chain, for example, that's not something which changes sort of quickly. So I think it's going to be a while before we get sort of the weight of information and data that we need in order to have any real difference on some like chunky business challenges. So yeah, it's a bit further out, I think. Yeah.
Completely far away from us.
Yes.
I'm so happy that my digital colleagues answer so great to this question. Yeah, we are absolutely far behind.
No, I feel your pain on that one, yes. Okay, great. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. So and if you could each just give us a couple of words on what you're looking forward to for the rest of this year and potentially into kind of next year. What kind of developments are you hoping for and looking forward for the future?
For us, the key priority will be data. So data management, generally speaking, meaning from technology to data scientists to capabilities of extracting insights from data to properly inform the growth strategy for the coming year. So data will be the key driver for us for sure.
Super.
I mean, for us, data obviously is one. I mean, that's a new asset we all have, or we should have. But more specifically on data, what happens in the past months or even year, highlighting the importance for us of owning what should be our asset, which is first-party data, right? And then how do we leverage that in terms of operations? And of course, the tech and all of the rest will follow. But there is a lot on data, and there is a lot on also on how do we go. We talk a lot about transparency, so I will come back on that one. There is a high priority for us on how do we go beyond the privacy policies and all of that, and how do we start empowering truly consumers to understand what we're doing with that.
Yeah, I think for me it's around the application of, the practical application of AI and machine learning. So we've launched something recently called My Editions on Johnny Walker, which is a mix of personalization of packaging and as well as the liquid that's in the bottle. So I think the exciting piece for me is how AI is starting to change the way we think about our products, the choices we make around our innovations, and how quickly we're responding to sort of, cues around whether those liquids are being appreciated by our consumers. So I think that for me in the next sort of 12 months, I'd really hoping to see some sort of traction in that space and really start to understand more about what we can do to make our products more relevant.
Super. Okay, well, thank you very much. So thank you for your transparency and your trust today. So, and Ben, I'll leave you to sprint for the airport.
Oh, no,
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.